maybe. So I'll give it just a couple minutes here. In the meantime, have some bourbon. If you're choosing to make this an alcoholic drink, you don't have to, you can. It's a good week for it if you do. Some lemon juice, your apple cider, the bitters, we'll talk about those bitters, ginger beer. You're gonna need, for the first drink, you're gonna need a tall glass. Get one of those. Ice, you're gonna need ice. And yeah. Maybe even a nice little cocktail napkin to put your drink on. I just happen to have these lying around. Really weird, right? I always feel like one of those, is it F1 or Indy car that's always like super branded? I think it's IndyCar, isn't it? Probably, yeah, I see some nodding, yeah. So it's like, just take a sip out of my Shadowsoft consulting mug here. Make sure not to spill any on my Shadowsoft shirt. But if I do, I could wipe it up with my Dynatrace napkin. Yeah, you get the idea.
Ricky Bobby.
Yeah, exactly. Ricky Bobby here with all sorts. And I think most people, if you were able to register in time and get it all set up, most people should have their Dynatrace cocktail shaker. So yeah, we're like fully branded here. Endorsed, let's say endorsed, branded. But yeah, I am happy to endorse all of these products and companies. So I'm gonna give it one more minute, and then I'm gonna just dive right in, and we're gonna talk about all things cocktail. I'm gonna teach you some tips and tricks that we do in the bars that make those drinks look really nice and taste really nice. A couple, pro tips here and there. I think, let's see. I would encourage everyone, if you're comfortable, to share your video and find a fun background. That's always fun to do, because if you're going to be following along making the drinks, I can see, and it's fun to see, what kind of bourbon people are using, or, if you are using a different spirit, or especially when it's like local stuff from the area, it's kind of fun to see someone's like, oh yeah, this is a really neat bottle that's made in my hometown, or, whatever it is. So feel free, again, if you're comfortable, to share your video. It's fun to see. We're not going to judge you. You can judge me. That's fair. I'm putting myself out there, but yeah. Let's see. I think, are we pretty close? Casey, I'm going to look to you. Are we pretty close to the number that you're expecting to see, or do you want to give it another minute?
Just give another minute or so.
Okay. Yeah, I'll give it another minute. Sure. All right. I see a couple names I think I recognize, which is always fun. Yeah. So yeah, ingredient wise, just to run through again, I know we have a couple people that joined. You'll need some sort of cocktail shaker, and then some bourbon, a little apple cider, some lemon juice, bitters, ginger beer, and ice. That's going to be everything you need for the first drink we're going to go through. I will talk you through it, kind of give you the reason why I like this drink. Ross has Bundaberg rum. Are you from Australia, Ross? Because that's something that we don't see here very often.
Yeah, that's the best rum in the world.
That's arguable, but yeah, it is one of the rums in the world. But it's just about the only rum I think that's kind of made locally there in Australia, isn't it? It's got kind of a fun history.
Yep, up in Bundaberg in Queensland. So it's maybe about a 4-hour drive from where I'm from. Interestingly, it actually does have a very acquired taste, let's put it.
Yeah, no, it's funky, but rum gets like that because it's, the way that the sugar cane can ferment, or the molasses, so you can get some of that kind of interesting funky or vegetal notes to it depending on how they do it. So let's call it a loyal following. Excellent. Cool. Well, I think we're going to get rolling here. I'm going to start out just by saying hi and some introductions. And I'm also going to give you some of maybe the best news you'll hear today, which is there is no PowerPoint. There are no slides. We're going to have fun. We're going to make drinks. We're going to drink them. We're going to talk about them. and it's going to be fun. So let me introduce myself. My name is Jason Suss. You can see from the window, I own a company called A Proper Pour. I do private bartending, cocktail classes, things like this. I have been doing this for the last 7 years. In parallel, for the last almost 15 years, I was in the software intelligence world, which is why I may look familiar to some of you and some of you look familiar to me. So you'll kind of hear me make some analogies today on some of the things that we're doing to what it is that our my personal friends at Dynatrace and Shadowsoft are able to do, and some of the things they do with Red Hat as well. So I am going to walk you through the cocktails, a little information about it. I encourage everyone, once I get this open here, to not be shy. If you have any questions, you are welcome to send them either to everyone in the chat or to just me in the chat. If it's an embarrassing question, I'm going to pretend that someone from Dynatrace asked it. So feel free to do that. That can be fun. And happy to see what your thoughts or feedback is. And I think if you want, and you can just go off mute and jump in with a question. It's a small enough group. I think we can handle that. So anyway, welcome to my friends at Shadowsoft, my friends at Dynatrace. We're going to have some fun today. We're going to make some cocktails. The first cocktail we're going to make, we are going to shake. And we are going to use the lovely Dynatrace cocktail shaker that I think most of you should have received. If you registered in time, you should have the cocktail shaker. You shake a cocktail when it has juice. When it doesn't have juice, you should stir it. Juice and alcohol typically don't like to play together. And so that more aggressive shaking helps to get them to stay together. Think like oil and vinegar, in a salad dressing, you give it a good shake so they stay together, and then eventually they'll settle out. Same thing with alcohol and juice in a drink. If you don't shake it, they'll probably settle a little bit. So the shaking helps it stay together. Think of the shaking kind of like turbulence, right? We want to give it that good shaking. And we think of turbulence. When does turbulence happen? Anybody fly planes? And I know a lot of us probably have. You guys remember planes? Remember going on planes?
Yeah, we used to those.
When we used to do that. But in the plane, when you experience turbulence, when does it happen? Typically happens when you enter the clouds, right? So now thinking about as you enter the cloud, right, as you're deploying applications, whether it be AWS or Azure or GCP or any of the other public or private clouds that have spun up, there's opportunities for there to be turbulence, right? And you don't want turbulence. And the best way to avoid turbulence is to make sure that everything is being deployed in a smooth and clean and environment that is designed specifically for cloud deployments. And you can see where this is going. That's why we have Red Hat, Shadowsoft, and Dynatrace here today, because they are experts in how to do all that. But we'll get to that maybe a little bit later. Let's get some drinks going. So the first thing we're going to do in our cocktail shaker is take off the big lid, take off the small lid, put it aside. We are going to put in, I always start with the base spirit. Let's go ahead and put in the bourbon. So grab your bourbon. If you don't like bourbon, you can use vodka. It'll work just as well. Honestly, with this drink, because of the way the flavors are, it's pretty open to anything. I would say it's a pretty kind of agnostic environment to the spirit that you choose to use. So vodka could work. Bourbon, obviously. Rye whiskey would work. It'd be a little spicier. Rum would be really nice. You can see Ross has Bundaberg up there, the official rum of Australia. Australia known for its tropical sugarcane production, apparently. So maybe not. So we're going to use 2 ounces of our base spirit into the cocktail shaker here. The 2 ounces is the larger size of the jigger that came in your cocktail kit. Otherwise, measure 2 ounces. That's 60 milliliters for people who prefer metric. It is, I believe, 4 tablespoons if you're using the measuring spoons out of the cooking drawer, which is totally cool. It's just 4 tablespoons. But yeah, you can use bourbon, you can use vodka. Gin would even work, honestly. Rum would be nice. It's pretty agnostic, much like Dynatrace, to whatever environment you put it in, whether it be Java, .NET, PHP, whatever. Dynatrace works in all of them. So bourbon is in the shaker. We're going to add some lemon juice. When we do lemon juice, always fresh lemon. And yes, these lemons look funny. Why do they look funny? Because I made a bunch of cocktails last night and all I needed was the peel, right? Because we have peeler. So I make the peel, I give it a twist, I use it as a garnish. I don't want to throw away the whole lemon. So I save the lemon, and then the next day, conveniently enough, I needed lemon. So now I can use the juice. So it's just a good way to be, kind of efficient with your fruit. Use the peels. You can take the extra peels, put them in a jar of vodka, steep it, add a little sugar, and make yourself some limoncello. But we're going to use a 1/2 ounce of juice, and a lemon like this typically has about 1 ounce. So we're going to cut the lemon in half. Get yourself a sharp knife. It's been a rough 7 months. You've earned it. Treat yourself. Get a sharp knife. It makes such a difference. So we'll go ahead, just slice it right down the center, right? So we're going to have it kind of like this with the stem right at each side, and just give it a good slice. We only need 1/2, so you can put the other half away. And then we're going to take the juice from that lemon. I have a juicer like this. It looks like the lemon fits this way. That is not the way to do it. It should be flat side down, because the holes are here. We want the juice to come out. So we're going to give that a good squeeze right into our shaker here. If you don't have one of these kind of juicers, that's fine. You can just squeeze in your hand. If you have the other style, like this, you can use one of those too. It's known as like a reamer as opposed to a squeezer. Whatever you like. It's the juice, and the juice is worth the squeeze. Has anybody heard that expression before? Is the juice worth the squeeze? Like, is the product worth the effort that goes into it? First time I heard that expression was Steve Tack. He was talking about, making product enhancements to Dynatrace. He runs the technical team for Dynatrace, and he said, you got to make sure the juice is worth the squeeze. And so that kind of stuck. I always liked that expression. The next thing we're going to add is our apple cider. It's like a good fall drink. So get some apple cider. This one I got today. It is a Honeycrisp apple. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Honeycrisp. It was designed by the University of Minnesota. So I live here in Minneapolis, and it is it's kind of our local apple, and it's just a really good blend of both sweet and tart. So I like that one. Any apple cider, even apple juice is going to work. We're going to go 2 ounces on that. So 60 milliliters, 2 ounces, 4 tablespoons of the apple cider. We'll go ahead and add that right in. And now the bitters. So in your cocktail kit should be a bottle of the Dynatrace bitters. There are some restrictions on shipping food or alcohol products. This isn't technically considered alcohol, but because there is alcohol in it, just like in vanilla extract, a couple states restrict that. So use any bitters you want. This is the kind that I think most people have, the Angostura bitters. Sorry, it's a little bright there because of the lighting. You can use whatever bitters you want. If you have the Dynatrace aromatic bitters, go ahead and use those. And we don't have to be shy with these. We want a nice kind of spice to this. Usually like 3 good dashes. Bitters are to bartenders what seasoning is to chefs, right? There's all different types of bitters out there, and it's really, really concentrated flavors. Typically citrus peel, cinnamon, clove, those types of like kind of baking spices, very aromatic. So we're gonna go with about, I'd do like 3 good dashes. So 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Again, that's just kind of seasoning it. Okay. So we have our little bottle of bitters, we had our big bottle of bourbon, we have our jigger, we have our shaker, we have all the contents in here, but not the ice. And you may have noticed I have used quite a variety of containers to hold all these products, right? And while this container has juice in it, you're probably more used to containers having Java in it. And you can see I have my containers orchestrated here in a way that makes sense to me for me to be able to use. And so while we have the drink in there and we're just kind of letting all the flavors sort of meld together before we go and give it a shake and top it with our ginger beer, I want to turn it over to my friends Mike and Steve to talk just really quickly about this concept of containers and container orchestration and how that's accomplished with the technical capabilities of Dynatrace, along with an environment like OpenShift with Red Hat, and most importantly, the expertise and know-how from Shadowsoft to understand how that needs to happen, right, and best practices. So Steve and Mike, I'm going to turn it to you to chat about that for just a second while we let these flavors kind of hang out.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jason. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of get us started here before we come back to wrap that cocktail up. So Jason and I have actually done a couple of these before, and this is one of the first ones that we're doing here with Shadowsoft, and then some of the other ones I was doing these jointly with Red Hat. And what's been fascinating, kind of about the relationship between Dynatrace and Red Hat and Dynatrace and Red Hat's joint partners like Shadowsoft is really kind of taking advantage of some of the capabilities that Red Hat has offered to their technology partners in the technology ecosystem, right? So when we look at what Red Hat is bringing to the table with containers, you're talking about, first off, the UBI, right? That universal base image, right? So Jason's actually sitting here talking about like these, ways to measure things. And he's got, you're sitting here, you've got your shaker that's waiting for all of your stuff to, your flavors to blend there. When you think about the UBI, you can almost kind of draw a parallel to, perhaps some of the, one of the things that I've seen recently in my Facebook feed, and I don't know why, maybe Facebook thinks I'm an alcoholic, but Facebook has actually been showing me ads for things like an old-fashioned base, right? Which is like the bitters and the simple syrup and kind of all that stuff ready to go. So when you look at the UBI, it's actually that base image of Core OS, minimized to the max, but it's going to be supported by Red Hat, right? So rather than relying on you to kind of pull together your random base image off of Joe Schmo's entry on Docker Hub, which is now throttled because Docker Hub wants everybody to pay for access to container images, right? You have this ability to utilize a certified and supported base image that's secure that you can package your applications on top of. Right, the Red Hat UBI is what Dynatrace uses when we're creating the base image for both our operator as well as the one agent container images. And when we talk a little later about observability, we'll talk a little bit more about what the operator allows us to do with the one agent. But to kind of set the table for that, taking advantage of the technologies that Red Hat has offered to us in OpenShift and kind of the capabilities of the platform, we utilize operators to roll the agent out to your entire cluster so that you can monitor everything, so that you can know how many dashes of bitters are actually in your drink, pretending that your drink is maybe Java. I don't know. I was going somewhere with that and I totally lost it. But sadly, I'm a presenter and I'm not allowed to drink. So I have no excuses other than my own lack of mental acuity. So, again, looking at containers, that the nice thing here is having that UBI that we can base everything off of, again, having a nice supported foundation on which you can build your application so that you're not drawing from the insecure internet, and then relying on your container orchestration platforms like OpenShift in order to help us orchestrate the applications in these environments, right? And then a little later, we'll be talking about, how organizations like Shadowsoft can help you stand all these things up and ease your transition. And we'll also be talking a little bit about how we can see what's happening inside there. So with that, I think we've got things steeped enough. What do you think, Jason?
Yeah, I think we're ready to go for it. Awesome. Okay, so you may want to switch back to the view of me on the screen because I'm going to show you some things to do here in case it changed on you. Yeah, okay. So we have our bourbon, lemon juice, bitters, and apple cider in the shaker already. I know there's a couple new people that jumped in, so just so you can catch up. Cliff's notes, in the shaker, 2 ounces of bourbon, ½ ounce of lemon juice, 2 ounces of apple cider, maybe 4 dashes of your Dynatrace bitters. If you don't have Dynatrace bitters, totally fine. You can use Angostura, any other bitters, just kind of adds that seasoning. So that's in the shaker. Now we're going to add ice, but we need ice for 2 things. We need ice for the glass that our drink is going in, and we need ice for the shaker. We don't want to use the ice that we shook in the drink because it gets so beat up and a little diluted, or a little kind of melted. We want nice fresh ice in the glass. So grab yourself some ice. All right, we're going to add ice to the shaker. So you get in there so it's about 3/4 of the way up. The rest of the ice is going to go in your glass where the drink's going to end up. Again, we want that nice and full. Now, as a bartender, right, having worked at a number of different bars and restaurants, the ice should be full in the glass. And it's not our sneaky way to try to rip you off and not have a lot in there. The more ice that's in the glass, the colder the drink stays, the less it dilutes. So it stays tasting the same way you want it to taste. No matter what size glass or whatever, it's going to be the same recipe that goes in. It's going to be 2 ounces of a base spirit or you know, whatever is going in that. So I promise you, it's not a way to try to cheat people. It's just a matter of it stays nice and cold the more ice that's in there. I see people make drinks, they put 2 ice cubes in, you know, a bunch of vodka and some cranberry or something, and then it melts and it doesn't stay cold, it doesn't taste good, and they're really only hurting themselves. So let's give it a good shake. The big cap goes on first, then the little cap. Hold it kind of like you're gonna throw a football, but get your finger on top of that little cap there so it doesn't go flying on you. The cap side should always be facing you, just in case, heaven forbid, the top comes off. You want it on you and not the guest across from the bar, unless you don't like the guest across the bar and it comes off, whoops, and you can pretend like it was an accident and maybe it gets them to leave. But for today, let's keep it finger on the top. Give it a good shake. I'd say about 8 seconds or so is good. Here we go. That should do it. We want the juice, the alcohol, everything to kind of mix together. And just as importantly, we want the drink to chill and dilute a little bit because the bourbon's pretty strong. We want to just bring it down a little bit. Same amount of bourbon in there. We're just making it kind of a little more gentle. Now what I like to do, sometimes people will pour this into the glass and then top it with ginger beer. I don't like to do that because then the bottom is all like bourbony apple and the top is nothing but ginger beer. I want them to mix together nicely, right? I want to take my base image, right, and add my, you know, my custom thing to it, but I want them to all come out together. And I liked Mike's example there with like the old fashioned kits you see, it's everything but the booze. It's a UBI. It's like the margarita mix or, you know, any of those other like pre-cocktail mixes that are super convenient. It's all there. Just add your vodka, add your gin, add whatever it is. So good example there, Mike. All right, so we're gonna add, I'd say like 3 ounces of ginger beer. I have the Q ginger beer today. Bundaberg makes one, just like Ross's rum. Gosling's is really popular. There's another one called Reed's, whatever. Ginger beer is just like ginger ale. It's just a spicier, stronger ginger flavor. It is not alcoholic, despite the fact that it says beer. It's typically a non-alcoholic. 1, 2, 3 ounces, perfect. It's 90 milliliters for those of you following along in metric. And we're gonna go ahead and just give it a little swirl and then just pour that all together right into the glass. Look at that, look at that. It's like I've done this before. There's value in experience, everyone. That's like the value that Shadowsoft provides with their experience of having done all of these cloud migrations constantly. So we have the drink in the glass with the ice. It looks pretty. We're gonna garnish it. So a garnish should serve one of 3 purposes. It would be to look nice, to taste good, or to smell good. So sometimes you'll see a lemon twist. You typically shouldn't eat the lemon twist. It should look nice, you know, it's pretty, but it should be very aromatic and smell nice. Or it should be something that you eat, which we can do in this drink. So I like to take an apple, and again, my super sharp knife, because, I mean, let's be honest, we deserve it, right? A good knife. And I'm just gonna cut like 3 just pretty wedges here. Carefully, please. We don't want anybody getting injured. So there's 1. And 2, almost 2, so close. And I'm gonna go 3. There's something in the food and beverage world about the number 3. If you ever go out for a fancy meal and you look at like some of the way the dishes are plated, a lot of things are in 3s. It'll be like you order the scallop entree, it's 3 scallops. You order the shrimp thing, it's 3 shrimp, or always odd numbers for some reason, which makes it difficult for sharing. But there's something to it, I guess, in just the aesthetics of plating where odd numbers are nice. So I'm gonna take the apples and just kind of fan them out like that. And I'll tuck them right here into the top of the drink. Tall drinks like this that are carbonated, I think a straw makes it easier to drink. So I will throw my compostable, right? We're gonna be responsible here, straw into the glass. And you can see I have my spiced, it's a little bright there. My spiced apple, bourbon, ginger, refreshing cocktail. So you've been following along. This is the best time. This is the time we take a sip. We try the drink. You know, I always forget how good that is. I haven't made one of these in a little bit. The tartness from the apple is really nice, and the lemon juice helps bump that up, right? We're layering flavors. The bitters just kind of add that nuance of complexity to it. The bourbon is like the backbone behind it, where you know that's how you just know it's an alcoholic cocktail. But then the ginger beer, this particular one, has a really nice spice to it. So on the finish, you get that kind of like back of your throat spice. That's that nice spicy ginger. And ginger and apple, I mean, those two flavors are meant to go together. If you wanted to like really even take it up a notch, you could grate a little fresh cinnamon right over the top here and really, give it that emerald, bam, take it up a notch. But that is kind of a classic example of a drink that started as a sour, right? So the category of sour is spirit, citrus, and sugar, right? And then we lengthened that drink, or we made it a tall drink by adding something carbonated, which is typically like called a Collins style. So if you know the drink, the Tom Collins, gin, lemon, sugar, topped with soda. So this is kind of a apple, bourbon, sour Collins, right? If you were to take those things and put it together. Shake and drink in our Dynatrace cocktail shaker, the jigger, we strained it out. If you don't have one of these and you're using this other type of shaker, you would use what's known as a Hawthorne strainer to keep the ice in and let the drink out. And so with that, we have our first drink to sip on. And I kind of walked you through all the tools that I use here to make a drink like this. And how I knew to mix these flavors together because I have the experience of working with these ingredients. And I know that bourbon and apple and ginger goes really well together. And there's, a lot of other different flavors that I know go well together, like hibiscus tea and lime go really well together, and coffee and chocolate and things like that. And that comes from experience. So I want to take a minute here to, mostly because I want to drink some more of this drink and take a breath. But I want to turn it over to Steve to talk about tools, right? Tools in general. I talked about the tools that bartenders use. He's going to talk about the tools that they use and the experience and the expertise that goes along with it, so that in their environment, right, they're able to create something that is well integrated and delicious. So I will turn it to you, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yeah, unfortunately, I am not drinking yet as well, but I will be saving these drinks for immediately afterward. But this whole concept that we're talking about here around cloud native methodologies and microservices is something I think we're all interested in, obviously because we're here, but it's one of those things that we all want to transition to those microservices based architectures and cloud native methodologies, utilizing things like containers and all the cool hip technologies that we hear every year when we go to reInvent, well, virtually this year, and coming out of Silicon Valley and all that. But as I've been saying for years about containers are easy as long as you just have one to deal with, right? But as soon as you start adding more containers or people to that scenario, things get very complicated. And so, usually that journey looks like something like we start talking about the flavor of Kubernetes that we prefer or the cloud provider that we want to use and leverage. But, most of you on this call probably already know there's so much more that goes into rolling out a production ready microservices or cloud native strategy. And so you have to think about things like load balancing and traffic management, routing, health monitoring, ingress, security considerations like intrusion protection, user and service authentication, and even things like how do you scale your databases? How do you deal with persistent storage? Do you even use persistent storage? How do you automate not just your build and release cycles, but a lot of these things that we've talked about that I just mentioned? It's all these things. How do you change the processes within your organization? And there's so much more to this as you start peeling back the covers that you realize that there's a lot going on. And so now you're looking at literally hundreds, if not potentially thousands, I don't know, of tools out there to consider with a deadline that your CEO gave you that's approaching faster than I think Nevada can count their ballots, which, yeah, I gotta plug the election, right? So where does Shadowsoft fit into all this chaos? How can we help you guys along the way? Well, outside of the implementation services of a lot of these tools that you're probably looking at, we're mentioning here, and we're partnering with the leaders in this space. We found that one of our sweet spots really is helping organizations like yourselves. And in fact, I'm looking at the people on the call, and we've worked with a lot of you guys in this space of helping you guys figure out these tools and how they can actually fit into your organization's existing environment, your existing processes, your existing culture to make an immediate impact, but also help you decide the things that you may need to change to go to that next level of where you want to be and what's realistic. I remember referencing many moons ago, sitting across a lunch table with a new client of ours back when you can meet in person and fly and stuff. And they had told me that year that they had initiated almost 60 POCs alone just over the last 12 months to try to determine what tools were right for them to try to go on this journey that they were on. And so a lot of you have probably been in that space too, of just going, I don't have time for all this garbage. Like, these are too many tools, too many things to consider. And, our organization has helped tons of people along the way, and we're full of engineers, we're full of problem solvers, critical thinkers. And I think the one thing that we've learned, or one of the big things that we've learned, is there's not a one size fits all approach for any of this, that everyone has their complexities. I think each of you would admit that you all have situations and your transformations are unique from other people's. But the reality is that as we've worked with hundreds of people from Fortune 100 retail and financial organizations down to small telco or service provider clients that we have, we've come across a lot of these scenarios and probably come across something that can help. And so what we do is we come in not with a pre-built agenda or plan that we're already going to just walk in and try to sell you on, but we take the time to understand your exact situation. And really the term that we use is accelerate this journey that you're on by assisting you in not just the tool selections, but considering things that you're maybe not thinking about, considering things that you should probably avoid or help you avoid, that some of our other clients have had big headaches as they've kind of hit those potholes along the way. And so you can actually use their lack of experience and maybe hours at the time to learn from that. And so if you're on this call and you're one of those early adopters and we helped you, thanks for helping everyone else on this call later on. So really, I think for me to wrap it up, it was really, despite what my marketing team will probably kill me for saying right now, is that I'm not trying to sell you guys as much on Shadowsoft services today as much as I am trying to sell you on just getting help from someone who's been there before. This is a huge journey. It's a huge transition. And I know a lot of us are problem solvers and we're smart people and we can figure it out. But having someone that's been there before, I've seen is the key to success. And, the reality is that I think no one is better equipped and no one's better positioned than Shadowsoft to be that partner for you. That's why I work for them. That's why I continue to work for them. But just get help from someone. Hopefully it's us. But I'll stop there, Jason. I'm sure people are wanting to drink another drink now, but yeah, I'll let you get to that second drink.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, and that's kind of what I was leading into, is having the right tools, having the right experience, right, and being able to know how to implement, right. I know how to implement these things into a tasty drink because I've had experience, and if it was my first time, I would definitely want someone helping and guiding me so that I don't either poison myself or make something that's going to taste terrible. So what we can do first off is we're going to move into the second cocktail here, which is going to be a classic, like proper Manhattan. I'm going to teach you all the kind of nuances about that. But I saw this other drink here, and much like what we're seeing going on in really all of all the companies that you're working with, is people are remote and people are mobile, and there's things that have to happen, right, to enable that. And so for me, it's easy. I just take my little to-go cup here. I'm not going to need the straw anymore. I'll save the apples for the top. And if I want to enable a remote user, all I have to do is deploy into a different container. And if I had Dynatrace going here, it would be completely automated, which would be a lot easier. There we go. And now I am free to go totally mobile. Oh, apples, gotta add the apples. And off I go, nice and mobile. And I can save that for later. Okay, round two, the classic Manhattan. So the Manhattan is one of those cocktails that's been around, I mean, kind of since the beginning. The original was the old fashioned. If anybody joined us for the first cocktail class we did, we made an old fashioned. So this time I thought it'd be nice to make a Manhattan. Not too different. There's just one main ingredient that makes a Manhattan, and that is the sweet vermouth. Also, because there's no juice in this drink, the vermouth is not considered a juice. It's just kind of considered a liquor, even though it's not distilled. It's just fermented like a wine, which is technically juice, but we're getting into nuances here. It is not considered like a fresh juice, so it doesn't need to be shaken. It needs to be stirred. So we're going to stir it in a mixing glass. Now you have your Dynatrace shaker. Just take the top off that. You're going to use it like a mixing glass. You have your spoon. I'm going to show you how to stir properly. But first, we're going to build out this drink. I am going to use in this one a different bourbon. I have my Knob Creek single barrel, 120 proof. Okay, so that's an interesting difference compared to the Maker's Mark I use. That's 90 proof, right? 120 proof, 90 proof. This is a much stronger bourbon, which means I'm going to use a little less of it because I understand that if I did 2 full ounces of this, that's almost like a drink and a half, and that's more than I want right now. So I'm going to go a light 2 ounces, probably about 1.5 ounces. So in your jigger here, you're going to go maybe just a little bit below the top there, because as you know, the measurements are more the higher you get because of the conical shape. So about 1.5 ounces of this high proof bourbon. We're going to talk about proof in a second here. Then I'm going to add a few dashes of my Dynatrace bitters, 3 or 4. I sometimes even go a little bit more. Yeah, I want to make sure I get all that flavor. And then again, what makes a Manhattan is the sweet vermouth. So I'm going to add the sweet vermouth. Watch what I do here. Where was my vermouth? It was in the refrigerator. Why was it in the refrigerator? Because it had already been opened. Because vermouth is not distilled. It's a fortified wine. And so it's just as sensitive to oxidation as other wines. You leave a bottle of red wine or white wine open on the counter for a couple of days and come back and taste it. Yeah, you have yourself probably a not so great vinegar. Vermouth, the same thing happens. So if you don't like vermouth, it's probably because you've had some that someone had left sitting out for a long time and it oxidized and got funky and didn't taste good. Once you open the bottle, unopened, it's fine. But once you open it, a couple days at room temperature, a few weeks in the fridge. Don't keep it longer than that. First of all, it's relatively cheap. You shouldn't need to, be trying to save it for that long. Also, you should be drinking it because it's delicious. But yeah, keep it in the fridge. We're going to do 1 ounce of the vermouth. So that is the small side of our jigger. Right into my mixing glass. And then we're going to add our ice and do the same thing we did before. We're going to add the ice last because I want to control the dilution and the chilling of the drink. Also, I'm doing it in this. One, because I have it because it's a fancy mixing glass and it's kind of my thing. But it's also nice because imagine me right at a bar in a high volume environment. I want to know what's in these. If this is this color, I know that it's a Manhattan. If it's a lot brighter red, I know it's a Negroni. If it's clear, I know it's a Martini. And so what that gives me is observability, right? I can tell what's in there because I have access to see what's in the container. And that observability allows me to know, are the ingredients in there? Is there enough of it? Is it going to be able to make the 3 cocktails I need that, that just came up? If more people come into the bar and I need to make more, I can add to it. And I know there's room for me to be able to do that and to scale. So all these concepts are really not much different than the issues that you address in your environments, right? How do you handle scale? how do you make sure you can tell what's in the containers, right? How do you implement observability? And so while the drink is here and kind of ready, I'm going to grab my ice. I'm going to turn it to Mike, who's going to share a couple things about this concept of observability. Because I think the term, used to be more, everyone was talking about like monitoring. And then monitoring has really kind of shifted more into observability, right? We want to know what's out there. We want to be able to see it. It's not quite that same way that we used to think of as monitoring. So I'm going to let Mike dive into that just a little bit. So Mike, over to you while I grab my ice and get this ready.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Jason. So one of the things that I always talk about, especially when we make this particular transition from what Jason is saying to what I'm saying here, is that, Jason's got that nice glass that he's able to, give you the nice little tips on stirring in. But you'll notice that it's crystal, maybe crystal-esque, right? There's a lot of facets on the side of that glass, so you don't necessarily have perfect visibility into the inside of what's happening there. So I sort of kind of liken that to, some of the capabilities and things like that around, second gen APM tooling. And then I also kind of liken that to some of the, imperfect capabilities around, some of the other observability solutions in the market, such that, when you have something like that, right, with those facets around the outside, you will sort of kind of get a picture of what's inside, but you don't necessarily have the details. With some of the other solutions on the market, you might end up having to, make code change and things like that in order to have access to those additional details. With something like Dynatrace, you don't have to do that. The one agent is injecting itself automatically into the application and allowing you to have visibility into what's happening without any code change. Right. And as Jason kind of alluded to, the change from monitoring to observability is really about taking more pieces into the picture. Right. So when you think about the three pillars of observability, you have metric, right, which is what people traditionally think of when they think of monitoring. Right, your time series data that might be coming out of something like Prometheus, or like if you're super old school, something like Nagios or Sitescope or all that other, crazy old fashioned things. And then you have your logs, right, which that's pretty self-explanatory. And I think Jason may or may not have some jokes about that later. And then the third thing that you have is traces, right? And traces are what you're getting out of your traditional APM tool set, right? That's the distributed transaction traces. That's where, Jason made the mobile joke, right? Where he actually had, his leftovers and he put it in a nice little insulated cup because he wants to make sure that he doesn't waste any alcohol today because he hasn't had enough yet. So, basically what you're going to get with your distributed transaction tracing and with your APM tooling with Dynatrace is you have that visibility from what's inside of Jason's mug all the way down to what's inside of that glass, right? That I don't know. Is there a fancy name for that, Jason?
The mixing glass?
Yeah.
It's called a mixing glass.
All right. So great. Well, now I know that there isn't a fancy name for that. But when you have that full stack of observability all the way from mobile, the end user experience on mobile, into the applications, running in containers on a platform like OpenShift, right? And then you extend that visibility into the nodes themselves, right? And then you wrap the whole thing with a artificial intelligence that we call Davis. Now what you end up with is a solution where you're basically in a scenario where anytime a problem occurs, you're essentially being presented the root cause, as opposed to having to do all the digging yourself, as opposed to having to stitch data sources, a bunch of different data sources together in order to get that information. You're getting that all in one. And again, when we get through these types of initiatives where we do start to make our transition to these new platforms, we typically end up with environments that are quite frankly too complex to really reason with. The kind of old-fashioned way to reason with ourselves. So you end up having to have some sort of AI assistant there to help you make sense of all this data, right? So we're traditional kind of seeing environments here at Dynatrace where, you might have, 16, 20,000 hosts and millions of processes, representing hundreds of thousands of different applications. Imagine what it would be like trying to collect insights there with eyes on chart, right? Just graphing time series data, not really going to do it for you, right? Simply alerting on any random anomaly without having the topology of the environment, also not going to work, right? Before I worked for Dynatrace, I was a customer, and when I was a customer, we also had some legacy teams that used the really, really old school tooling. This was 8 years ago, so the old school tooling was actually old school. And we had situations where the op team that sat near me, they literally had 15,000 alert emails in their inbox. How does that work for anybody? Like, how do you know which one of those 15,000 is something that you need to take action on, right? So that's where having that full stack observability becomes really important, because that's going to tell you, hey, this problem has this business impact. These 160 business users are impacted by this slow transaction on this host that was caused by this piece of code that you checked in yesterday at 3 o'clock, right? So these are all these things coming together to help us make sense of our complex distributed environments, and really helping us with a situation that would quite frankly be untenable otherwise. So now I think I've babbled about enough. So I think we probably all want to drink again. I know I want to. Jason,
I'm ready. I'm ready when you are.
Go for it.
All right. So we have in case anybody missed it, our base spirit. I chose bourbon. You could use rye. You could use scotch. It's known as a Rob Roy instead of a Manhattan. But I did just under 2 ounces of bourbon. And I did that because it is 120 proof bourbon, which is relatively high, right, on the proof scale. That means it's 60% alcohol versus my first bourbon that was 45% or 90 proof. So the bourbon's in there, a few dashes of my Dynatrace bitters, an ounce of the sweet vermouth that I removed from the refrigerator because otherwise it will oxidize and go bad. That's in there. We're going to add some ice. Manhattan can be served one of 2 ways. It can be served up, right, like in a martini glass or a cocktail glass without any ice. I prefer it to stay nice and cold, and I don't mind if it dilutes a little bit. So I like to drink my Manhattans out of a rocks glass. And then this is something, and this comes with experience, right? And we're going to talk about that later. I know the way I want to do this, right? I knew I wanted to put all that in the glass because it's going to sit for a second. I didn't want it to dilute. And now I know I want to put the ice in the glass. Not quite to the top. I don't want all the way to the top on this because it's a shorter, stronger cocktail. And the liquid level is only going to come up maybe to halfway. So I don't need the ice to go all the way up to the top. But I put the ice in there. And then the next thing I do is I get my cherries, because the cherries are such an important part of the Manhattan experience. So I'm going to take my fancy cherries here. These are the Luxardo cherries. They're in that real nice, dark, rich, sticky syrup. And that's why I do it this way, is I'm going to take my cherries, and I'm going to do 2 of them because, just treat myself here. 1, and then I skewer the second one. And I do it without touching the sticky cherries with my fingers because I don't want to get all gross. But you'll notice I have the sticky cherry syrup on the spoon. That's okay, because it's going in the drink. And now I have my garnish that I'm going to just leave there ready to go. But at no time did my fingers get sticky. And I got a little bit of that residual sugar cherry juice on the spoon. That's going to go into the drink too. And I like that flavor. If I had done that at the end, I would have made the drink, poured it, and then got the cherries. And then I'm left with a sticky syrupy spoon, right? And so it sounds trivial, but it's just little things like that that now I'm going to stir the drink and it'll come out and I'll have a clean spoon and I don't have to run back and forth to the sink. So just little things like that, right? That you learn from experience. I'm going to add the ice to the mixing glass. And now there is an official proper way to stir a drink. You'll notice on your spoon that there is the textured stem and then the base of the spoon. When you stir, I usually hold between my middle and my ring finger. and I keep the back of the spoon against the inside of the glass, right? So that's how it stirs. So as we drop that into the glass, you can see how the spoon is spinning, but the back of the spoon is staying against the inside of the glass. And the reason for that is all we want to do is just gently chill and dilute, right? As the ice melts a little bit in the alcohol, it's going to melt a little bit. That's fine. It'll dilute. It'll add a little bit of water. And then it's chilling, right? We want the drink to be nice and cold. I don't want to shake it up, right? I don't want to get it oxidized. I don't want to introduce a lot of air to it. I don't want to overshake it. I just want to gently chill and dilute. So I usually go about 20 times around, 18, 19, 20, right? Good enough. And then I'll do a little dab on the back of my hand. Taste it. Make sure it's not too strong. It's delicious. And then using your Hawthorne strainer, you'll put that right into your cocktail shaker. And I'm going to pour it. And when I pour it over the cherries. So any of that extra little syrupy juice on there gets mixed in. So I'm going to pour it right in the glass over the cherries. Every last bit. My Manhattan is done and ready to go. Just keep an eye on that skewer so you don't pierce that little membrane between like your nose and your brain. You don't want to do that, so be gentle. We take a sip. You can definitely tell it's a spirit-forward drink, right? It's a strong, high-proof bourbon. The vermouth adds a lot of complexity. Vermouth is like, think of it as wine with a little bit of sugar and then some parts that are bitter and some parts that are herbal and botanical to just bump the flavors up, right? And then we have our bitters for even more seasoning, and then a little bit of that cherry that got in there from the spoon. But let's go back to the bourbon for a second, because we talked about how it's high-proof bourbon. And the story of proof, I think, is a very interesting one. Way back in the day, right, you had the sailors that were out on the boats, and they would get their daily ration, or the barrel of rum or gin would show up, right? And those barrels were used to age the spirit. It makes it taste better. They cut down trees, they age the spirit. Everybody's thinking cut down trees, they're thinking log analytics, but it's a different log analytics. I know you guys are always thinking about logs, but they would get that barrel, and the first thing they would do is they would mix some of either the gin or the rum or the whiskey, whatever it was, with gunpowder. And then they would light it on fire. And if it lit, it was proof that the alcohol content was high enough and it hadn't been diluted and they weren't being cheated and it hadn't been tampered with. So that was kind of the way the term proof came up. And also, they drank a lot. And so they were probably stumbling around drunk quite a bit of the time, and they would spill. And if they spilled their rum or whiskey or gin onto the gun, onto the cannon, into the barrel of gunpowder, it needed to still work. And so if that proof was high enough, it would still work. So the idea here, and it's kind of interesting, is there were functional requirements for the booze, right? And to find out if those functional requirements were met, they did a proof, right? The same way, you have functional requirements for what your environment needs to have and what type of visibility you need and how your applications need to be running and deployed. And so you typically would do a proof, right? And make sure that if you deploy Dynatrace in your environment using OpenShift, with Shadowsoft there to kind of help and guide you, it does and shows you everything that you need, right? And it's important that in the spirits world, with the story, it was actionable, quantifiable, measurable, right? That's how they determined if the alcohol is good enough. I encourage people to do a proof and do it the same way. Make sure that it's actionable, quantifiable, and measurable, right? I need to be able to see page load time for 12 users from remote locations. I need to be able to see, what is consuming the highest amount of CPU, right? I need to be able to tell, I don't know if anybody's seen a demo, right? I've been doing this since before check destination was making the CPU time high, right? So those types of things that you want to see and understand, here's the root cause.
Uh-oh, is everybody else okay? Did we lose Jason?
I think so. So let me throw
Yeah, I'm
this.
good.
He'll come back. He'll I hope so, at least. Assuming, did anybody check the news? Is Minnesota still there?
Thanks.
I mean, it's 2020 after all. We want to make sure.
Must be a snowstorm.
I'll add you two. Maybe you two can help us
Oh,
talk
he's
more.
coming. I think he's coming back.
He is? Okay, hold on.
All right, unmute yourself, Jason. We can see you again.
Yeah, super weird. The whole thing shut down. Crazy. I didn't touch anything.
You're back.
Yeah, you just froze. It was a crash for sure.
Good. All right.
Welcome back,
So,
sir.
I'm back. Hi, everyone. Cheers. That deserves a sip. So anyway, as I was saying, I don't know where it got cut off, but you tasted the drink, taste the product. I think it's important that you try it. You can download the free trial and just try it. But that concept of proof, I thought was kind of a fun story. So now I think as we start to wrap things up here, you've been enabled, right? You now know how to make 2 proper cocktails. You can impress your friends. You can have people come over. You could build this whole batch up, multiply it by 5, 10, whatever, batch it out, put it in a bottle. And as soon as your friends come over, just pour the drinks for everyone. You can essentially automate the process of making a craft cocktail like this by just batching it out. Automation is something that we're seeing everywhere anyway. That's how they're doing it in cocktail bars. They're making big batches, they're putting it on tap, and then anybody, right, can deploy. And that just comes with, you know, the technology that's available, right? The bigger mixing glasses. So you've been enabled. I think that's important. I know how to make these drinks. There's a lot of drinks I don't know how to make yet. So I continue to talk to other bartenders, right, that have made other drinks, and I research and I read, and that ongoing education really helps me to keep my skill set sharp. And so those 2 things I think tie in nicely to what Steve's going to talk about with how do they go about enablement and how do they help you keep your skill set sharp and current. And so Steve, I'll let you kind of spend a few minutes to talk about how you handle that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and thanks for doing this, Jason. I know, you know, I don't know about you guys, but I'm definitely a visual learner, and I enjoy just seeing how things are done. And someone who knows what they're doing, you learn so much. Not only the history, thank you for that, but you see, like you said, you get enabled on how to do this, and then you can recreate it, you know, in your own time with your own friends later on. Not that we're all not best friends here, but you know, that enablement thing is something that I think is important to us. You know, if you don't know our history from a Shadowsoft perspective, we're born out of an open source culture. We were predominantly focused on open source technologies for the majority of our history. And, you know, one of the things outside of just that crowdsourcing, the development of technologies, is also the crowdsourcing of knowledge that comes with that open source mentality in the open source community. And so people are all about working together and collaborating and learning from each other. And so we've spent our entire from the beginning of the company back in 2008, focus on like education and giving back to the community, because that's what open source is all about. And so we've held tons of events just like this one. We do tons of you know, community, build communities in different parts of the country, user groups, various workshops that we've done just to help people learn from each other and just to connect people and learn. And so I think from an enablement perspective, you know, it's a lot of these concepts, the more complex they get, the more complex the learning aspect gets as well, right? It's not just about learning a technology or a tool and going in and reading the book and taking the test, but a lot of times, a lot of the enablement we're doing and the teaching that we're doing to people is things that you can't really learn in a book. You know, it's an organizational shift. It's a cultural shift. It's a mental shift a lot of times. And so what we do is we've gotten creative with the way that we teach people and enable people. We actually have a thing called Shadowsoft Academy as well that we've tried to perfect how people learn some of these technologies. And so what essentially Shadowsoft Academy is it's a piece of our organization where we bring people in that are in the IT world or want to get into the IT space, and we train them up on specific technologies. And so we can train them up to join our organization, or if we have a client that said, hey, I need a guy that is a rock star in this area, then we will train them up in that area, and then we can give them to the client essentially like as a present. So it's essentially like a Build-A-Bear for IT gurus. So if you haven't spoken to us about it and you want a bear, then let us know. But you know, one of the things that we do as well is we've gotten creative and gotten good at how we train people. And so outside of just doing classes, we found things like hands-on workshops customized things within your environment of not just teaching you the art of the possible, but showing you how things actually work within your environment and teaching people within your organization some of these skills that you've probably been learning and just pulling your hair out of, like, why can't I get anyone else to focus on this stuff? Honestly, putting that open source mentality to play within our organizations. And so doing things like building out internal user groups within your organization. We can come in and assist you with that. Of crowdsourcing, and getting your friends and your coworkers to pull together and learn from each other, and us kind of leading the charge as we do that sort of stuff. And so from an ongoing training perspective, that's been the biggest success for us within an organization, is inspiring you guys to learn and teaching you the beginnings of it, and then creating a system within your organization where you guys are training along the way. And I don't know if Mike wants to add anything from a Dynatrace perspective of what they've seen be successful on their end.
No, I mean, we have a lot of similar processes right around, helping folks be, certified in Dynatrace configuration and things like that. And we work a lot with, partners like Shadowsoft in order to ensure a successful rollout of Dynatrace. Obviously, we've made things simple enough that the vast bulk of functionality is zero config, right? That as kind of a design principle with the product. But as with anything, larger rollouts at, things like very large retailers or the federal government and things like that, some of the bigger deployments do require more customization around some of the things that like management zones, for example. Like you can use Dynatrace to configure something called the management zone, which is sort of kind of like RBAC-based visibility inside of the product. So you can say App Team X only has the ability to see things that are associated with their app. And that's something that, you do have to configure, because obviously there's no way Dynatrace is going to know what your team topology is. We know what your app topology is, but we don't know what your team topology is. So there's a lot of similar concepts like that. And that's where, obviously the expertise of partners and things like that comes into play, right? So that's one of the places where, so somebody like a Shadowsoft is going to be able to come in and make all of those pieces work together really smoothly. Right. But again, the Dynatrace side of the story is as much of the process as possible is near or zero config, right? We're all about automation. We're all about freeing people up to deliver business value.
Yeah, that's good. And I think in the end, we all want our clients to be successful. And so it's all about, we don't want to come in and be there forever. We want to enable you guys to be successful and continue rolling out the success within your organization and really make you guys the heroes. And so honestly, it's a horrible business model because, if we were there forever, it'd be better for business. But, that's not the business that I think either one of us are in. We want to just enable you guys to be the heroes. So.
Yep. I mean, we want our customers to be heroes, but on the flip side, we actually do want to be there forever. So I think that's one of the big differences in our business model. So we obviously want to continue helping the customers throughout their transition to cloud native technology as well as afterwards as well, right? So it's definitely not a one and done type of product for us. So. But I get the whole idea there too, right? It's because consulting companies kind of have that history of,
right.
Constantly looking for the next thing that, or whatever, and like you can't get them out the door. And it's always refreshing when I work with a partner organization where that's actually not their perspective. They want to help that customer, get that business value, and then, and then kind of be freed up to continue to help themselves.
Yeah, and I mean, just to jump in, it's the same, right? I mean, I tell you how to make a couple drinks, but you're going to want to learn other ones, right? And so you're going to, whatever that next step is, whatever that new thing is, you're going to trust me to come back and teach you what that next thing is the same way, right? A good consultant like that, you're going to trust to come back and teach you how to do the next thing, right? Because it's new to you.
It's so, like they always say, you can what is it? You can teach a horse to fish, but you can't make it drink. Right.
Nailed it. Yep, that's exactly what it is. So what I would love to do now is, since everybody's hopefully had a couple drinks, maybe you're a little less shy now. You're welcome to come off mute if you have any questions about anything. Hey, Jason, what's the difference between bourbon and rye? Or can you make bourbon in Canada? Or what's your favorite vodka? Or really anything. Or you can ask a question about Shadowsoft or Dynatrace too if you want. But let's be honest, most of us are here for the drinks. But yeah, feel free to jump off mute, ask any questions you have. You want to pick my brain about stuff. If you don't want to turn on your microphone, you're welcome to just throw a question in the chat. I'd be happy to answer. If there's anyone that has any questions, feel free.
And how about the person that just don't drink alcohol? What would be the best drink that you would recommend?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, let's be honest. A lot of people drink, especially during this past 7 months. Alcohol sales have spiked. It's just people are home and they're bored. But not everybody drinks, and it's fine. The interesting thing is alcohol is the only drug that people have to justify not using, right? It's just kind of a weird thing, the way culture is. No one has to explain to everybody why they don't do cocaine, right? But a lot of people are like, oh no, I don't drink because this, that, or the other thing. And so it's weird, but there's nothing wrong with not drinking. And there's nothing wrong with saying, I'll have a drink and then I don't want another one or whatever. So for the first cocktail, it works exactly the same and is really tasty. Just leave out the bourbon, add an extra ounce of apple cider, add an extra ounce of ginger beer. But you make it the same way, it'll look the same way, you garnish it the same way. And if you have people over and one person's not drinking, they still get served something that looks the same. It's inclusive, they feel like they're part of the party, and it's not anything that's like, oh, look at you drinking your soda or something. So that's kind of a nice thing to do. That first drink lends itself very well to a non-alcoholic counterpart. The Manhattan's trickier because there's 3 ingredients and all of them have alcohol. So that's probably not best suited for a non-alcoholic version. But there's a lot of things out there now that are bridging that gap. It used to just be, your choice was soda or water, right? And you don't want all the sugar in sugary sodas, and water's kind of boring. But you're seeing, if you go to a restaurant that has a nice bar, ask them what their non-alcoholic options are. They probably have a separate list of really interesting things they've done with infusions. I do a lot of stuff with teas. A lot of stuff is coming out now with CBD and cocktails, right? And it's kind of a different thing that it does. Also, there's a thing called a shrub. So an infusion is like typically you take alcohol or hot water and the flavor comes out. Vinegar will do something differently. And you'll see a lot of times people will mix vinegar, sugar, and a flavor. I have one in my fridge right now. It's fresh cut cucumbers, rice vinegar, and sugar. And I add, a half ounce of that to some club soda, maybe a little bit of mint, maybe top it with some ginger beer or something. And it adds a really interesting layer of complexity and acidity that's different from the citric acid acidity, which is more tart, to an acetic acid, right? A vinegar type acid that's more of a throaty, rich acid, for a lack of a better way to say that. So that's just kind of, some things that you're seeing out on the market. A lot of different non-alcoholic beers, non-alcoholic ciders. And then there's one called Lagunitas. If you guys know Lagunitas is a brewery, hoppy refresher. It's like a hop infused carbonated water. So it's like LaCroix, but instead of being lemon, lime, or berry, it's hop flavored. So it has that kind of hoppy, fresh, gardeny flavor to it. But no sugar, no calories. Really, really delicious product. So some great options for non-alcoholic. I did see a question that came in. What is the difference between whiskey and rye? Good question. All rye is whiskey. Not all whiskey is rye. So whiskey is the big umbrella for a fermented and distilled and typically barrel-aged product. And usually when it gets distilled, they don't distill it any higher than 160 proof. Especially for bourbon and rye, you're not allowed to. That's the limit. You go above that, and any of those original characteristics of what the base was, whether it's grain or barley or corn or anything else, gets kind of distilled out, and you're left with vodka, right? Which is neutral. Vodka is typically distilled to 190 proof or higher, so it's just neutral spirit, ethyl alcohol, basically diluted with water. Whereas bourbon, right? Maker's Mark is a bourbon. 51% or more of the base has to be corn, Then the other 49% is typically a mix of other things. Sometimes it's rye, sometimes it's wheat, sometimes it's barley or oats or all sorts of different things, right? Anything that has a starch that can be fermented. Once that is fermented, it is then distilled, which means they heat it up at about 175 degrees. The alcohol evaporates off, it condenses, they capture it, and it then gets put into a barrel, right? And we talked about it has to be American white oak trees turned into the barrels, right? So we talked about log analytics, right? All those trees. That's what it has to be. They make them into barrels. They typically char the inside, and then it ages in that barrel. And the char of the wood kind of caramelizes some of those natural sugars and things that exist in the wood. And so when it gets warm out and expands, the whiskey seeps in. When it gets cold and contracts, the whiskey gets pushed out, and it takes on a lot of those flavor characteristics. And most importantly, the color, right? When this went into the barrel, it was clear. When it came out of the barrel, it has taken on all that color and all those flavors that go with it. Typically caramels, vanillas, that oaky flavor to it. So bourbon, 51% or more corn, 160 proof is the limit for how high it can be alcohol-wise when it goes into the barrel. Aged in American white oak barrel. And then once it comes out of the barrel, the only thing they can do to it is add water to dilute it to whatever proof they want it to be. In this case, 90 proof, in this case, 120. And then it has to be bottled. They can't filter it. They can't add colors. They can't add flavors, nothing, in order to call it bourbon. And it has to be made in the United States. Rye, exact same rules, but it's rye instead of corn as the base spirit. So your question was the difference between whiskey and rye. Rye is whiskey. Whiskey is the big umbrella. Rye is a type. Bourbon's a type. Scotch is a type of whiskey. Irish whiskey is a type of whiskey. Canadian whiskey, right? Canadian Club, Crown Royal, all types of whiskeys. Underrated whiskeys we should try. Yeah, if you can find Buffalo Trace, I think for 25 bucks, it's one of my favorite bourbons. I really like Japanese whiskey. It's a little more expensive, but it's really interesting where bourbons are aged in American white oak. Japanese whiskey tends to be Asian. It's Mizuna or Mizunara oak. So it's kind of the Japanese version of an oak tree, and it has just a cleaner and fresher flavor to it. A little more like precise, where Scotch is kind of hearty and rough and sometimes, smoky. The Japanese whiskey is like really precise and really clean. So if you're into whiskey, I think Hibiki Harmony would be a great one to try and start with. They can get expensive. That one's a good example of like a nicer version of a Japanese whiskey. They're more comparable to like a Scotch, but not as peaty. Otherwise, let me look at my wall here. I have another down there with everything. Colonel E.H. Taylor is a good one if you can find it. There's one, McKenna 10-year is probably one of the most cost-effective 10-year aged bourbons. And the longer it's in the barrel up to a certain point, kind of the more of those nice, warm, oaky flavors and notes end up in the bourbon. So that's kind of my feelings on some of those whiskeys. Is there much difference between vodkas? So bourbon, right, those are the rules, which means that bourbons will vary, and that other 49% of the base and how long it's aged and where it's aged. But for the most part, it's bourbon. Rum, there's like a whole world. It's light rum, dark rum, all different types. It's made from molasses. It's made from sugarcane juice. So rum has a huge amount of variety in what it'll taste like. You could taste one and have no idea that it's in the same category as another rum. Bourbon, for the most part, if you taste it, you're probably going to know it's rum. Vodka is probably even more on the other side of the spectrum. I wouldn't say they're all the same, but the variation from vodka to vodka is really subtle because they're essentially getting distilled as high as possible to become pure ethyl alcohol, right? Or ethanol. So essentially, vodka by definition is odorless, colorless, kind of tasteless, neutral spirit. And it can be made from anything. A lot of people think it has to be potatoes. It doesn't. The Russian vodkas and Polish vodkas oftentimes are made from potatoes because potatoes are abundant there. But in the US, like for example, this one's made here in Minnesota. It's made from corn. Tito's, everybody knows, is made from corn. Kettle One and Grey Goose, I believe, are both made from wheat. So it can be anything, right, that has starch that can be fermented and then distilled. Some vodkas are flavored. They'll have to label that if they are flavored. Some vodkas will add like really trace amounts of things. So maybe just a touch of sugar or a touch of glycerin or like a touch of lemon peel. They're only allowed a certain amount, like parts per million. And so it's really, really, really subtle. They can be filtered, they can be distilled multiple times, but for the most part, they're kind of the same in that there's close to pure ethyl alcohol as possible. If anybody's into podcasts, there's a podcast called Planet Money, and they do one about vodkas, and they tested 4 or 5 vodkas with, like laboratory equipment, spectrometers and all that. And they're all kind of the same. A couple parts per million here or there, but for the most part, vodka is probably the one spirit that's going to be the most standardized. Gin gets totally different because you can add anything you want to it as long as there's juniper as a primary ingredient. But vodka, for the most part, I'd say has maybe the least amount of variance as a category. So that's the long answer to your short question. What other questions can I answer for anybody? I know we're probably getting kind of close on time here. People want to get on with their day, but if anybody has, here, I'll just put this in here to everyone. If anybody needs cocktail ideas, especially with the holidays coming up, you're welcome to reach out to me. Instagram is probably the one that I see the quickest. With any questions about cocktails, how to make them, ingredients. If you have questions about software intelligence, I could probably answer those too. I did that for 15 years, but you're better off reaching out to Mike on that one. If you have questions on services enablement and things like that, Steve is your guy. So I'm sure you'll get a follow-up email with any additional information or things you may want to find. So with that, I'll turn it over to either Casey or Jill to maybe any closing comments. Cheers.
Yes.